Charles Cook's morning began like any other in his peaceful suburban neighborhood. The sun streamed through the windows of his modest two-story home, birds chirped softly in the background, and the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. He had no reason to expect anything out of the ordinary. That is, until he stepped outside to grab the morning newspaper. The moment he opened the front door, Charles froze in disbelief. The driveway gate he had installed a year ago, a sturdy, custom-made steel gate with elegant designs that matched the style of his home, was gone. Not just ajar or broken, but completely removed. The posts where the gate once stood were bare, with a few jagged bolts still sticking out as evidence that it had once been there. It looked like a deliberate, professional removal. His shock quickly turned to confusion, then anger. He scanned the area, wondering if it had been stolen, though the removal seemed too neat and purposeful for a random act of vandalism. As his gaze wandered toward his front door, he noticed a white envelope taped to it. He grabbed it, ripping it open with shaking hands. Inside was a single typed letter on homeowner association letterhead. Subject: Driveway Gate Removal. Dear Mr. Cook, it has come to the attention of the Homeowners Association that your driveway gate is in violation of the community's aesthetic standards as outlined in Section 4.3 of the Homeowner Association Handbook. The gate was removed to ensure compliance with neighborhood guidelines. If you wish to discuss this matter further, you may contact the Homeowner Association office during regular business hours. Sincerely, the Homeowner Association Compliance Committee. Charles's hands tightened around the letter as he read it. Aesthetic standards? Section 4.3? None of this made sense. He had installed the gate with careful attention to the neighborhood's rules and even received approval from the Homeowner Association at the time. How could it suddenly be in violation? And why hadn't he been informed before the gate was removed? He stormed back inside, his mind racing. He grabbed his copy of the Homeowner Association Handbook from a kitchen drawer, a hefty binder filled with fine print and legal jargon. Flipping through the pages, he found Section 4.3, which now contained a clause stating that driveway gates were prohibited unless explicitly approved by the Homeowner Association. It had been added as a recent amendment, dated 2 months ago. Charles felt a pang of frustration. He had never been notified of any such change. No email, no letter, no mention at the Homeowner Association's monthly meetings, which he occasionally attended. Fuming, he called the Homeowner Association office, only to be greeted by a generic voicemail message. Frustration mounting, he decided to drive over to the Homeowner Association's office, located a few blocks away at the neighborhood clubhouse. When he arrived, the receptionist greeted him with a polite but indifferent smile. "I need to speak with someone about this," Charles said, holding up the letter. The receptionist glanced at it briefly and nodded. "I'm sorry, but the Compliance Committee isn't available to meet with homeowners without an appointment. You can leave a message or email them, and someone will get back to you within 7 to 10 business days." 7 to 10 business days? Charles repeated, his voice rising. "You tore down my property without notice, and you expect me to wait over a week for a response? This is ridiculous." "I understand your frustrations, sir," the receptionist replied, her tone remaining neutral. "But these are the procedures. If you'd like, I can take down your information and have someone from the committee reach out to you." Charles clenched his fists, realizing he was getting nowhere. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth, giving her his name and contact details. But as he walked back to his car, he resolved not to let the matter rest. This wasn't just about the gate. It was about the principle. The Homeowner Association had overstepped its bounds, and he wasn't going to let them get away with it. And then, back at home, Charles called a few of his neighbors to see if anyone else had experienced similar issues. To his surprise, several of them shared stories of recent conflicts with the Homeowner Association. One neighbor, Stacy, had been fined for planting flowers that were deemed too colorful for the neighborhood's neutral palette. Another, Mark, had been ordered to repaint his front door because the shade of blue he chose wasn't pre-approved. Both expressed their frustrations about the Homeowner Association's increasing micromanagement and lack of communication. "This has been happening more and more," Stacy said. They've become so power-hungry lately, and the worst part is they're not even following their own rules half the time. Charles's anger deepened as he listened. It wasn't just his gate. There was a pattern of overreach and arbitrary decisions by the homeowner association. Determined to gather more information, he decided to dig deeper. He combed through his emails, searching for any notice about the rule change. Nothing. No announcements, no meeting minutes, no warnings. He even checked the homeowner association's website, which hadn't been updated in months. As the day went on, Charles began to piece together a plan. First, he would document everything. Photos of the removed gate, copies of the homeowner association letter, and a timeline of events. Then he would consult the community bylaws to see if the homeowner association's actions were legally justified. If they weren't, he would file a formal complaint and consider taking legal action if necessary. That evening, as he sat at his dining table surrounded by papers and notes, Charles felt a renewed sense of determination. The homeowner association might have thought they could push him around, but they had underestimated him. This wasn't just about a gate. It was about standing up for his rights and holding those in power accountable. He had no idea how far this fight would go, but one thing was certain. He wasn't backing down. Charles couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he replayed the moment he saw his driveway gate missing, the letter on his door, and the dismissive attitude of the homeowner association receptionist. The anger simmered just beneath the surface, but beneath that anger was a deep sense of violation. His home was supposed to be his sanctuary, a place where he could feel safe, secure, and in control. The idea that someone, especially the homeowner association, could intrude on that without even a warning made his blood boil. By morning, Charles had a plan. He would start by understanding exactly how the homeowner association had managed to enforce this rule change without notifying him. Armed with his binder of community guidelines and a list of recent homeowner association meeting dates, he began searching for clues. He flipped through pages of meeting minutes he'd printed from the homeowner association website and scoured his inbox for any announcements he might have missed. As he worked, his frustration only grew. The homeowner association seemed to have buried the rule change in a single meeting he hadn't attended, a meeting that, according to his neighbor Stacy, had been rescheduled at the last minute and poorly advertised. To confirm his suspicions, Charles decided to pay Stacy a visit. She lived 2 houses down, in a charming yellow home with a well-maintained garden. Stacy greeted him warmly, but with a knowing look. "Let me guess," she said, crossing her arms. "The homeowner association's at it again." Charles nodded, holding up the binder and a stack of papers. "I need your help. They removed my gate and are claiming it violates a rule I didn't even know existed. Do you remember anything about this rule change?" Stacy sighed and invited him inside. Over cups of coffee at her kitchen table, she explained how the homeowner association had started making quiet changes to the community guidelines over the past year. The changes were often discussed in meetings that few residents attended, and the notices about these meetings were sporadic at best. "They don't even send proper emails anymore," Stacy said. "Sometimes they just post a flyer at the clubhouse and call it a day. If you're not checking every week, you miss it." Charles shook his head in disbelief. That's not how it's supposed to work. They're required to notify us of major changes, aren't they?" "They are," Stacy confirmed, "but they've gotten good at skirting the rules, and let's be honest, most people in the neighborhood don't bother to fight back. They just pay the fines or do whatever the homeowner association says to avoid the hassle." Charles clenched his jaw. "Well, I'm not going to roll over. Do you know if anyone else has had issues with the new rules?" Stacy nodded. "Plenty. Mark across the street is furious about his door. And remember Miss Bailey? They fined her last month for putting up a bird feeder." "A bird feeder, Charles. It's getting ridiculous." After an hour of conversation, Charles left Stacy's house with a clearer picture of what he was up against. The homeowner association wasn't just enforcing rules, it was bending them to suit its own agenda, counting on residents to comply out of apathy or fear. But Charles wasn't one to back down from a fight, especially when he knew he was in the right. His next stop was Mark's house. Mark was a retired contractor with a no-nonsense demeanor and a deep disdain for the homeowner association. When Charles explained what had happened to his gate, Mark didn't seem surprised. "They've been pulling this kind of crap for years," Mark said. "They think they're untouchable because no one holds them accountable. But they've messed with the wrong guy if they're coming after you." Mark shared his own story about the homeowner association forcing him to repaint his front door after deciding, seemingly at random, that the color was no longer compliant with community standards. He also mentioned that he'd tried to contest the fine, but was ignored. "They don't respond to complaints unless you threaten legal action," Mark said, "and even then, they drag their feet." Charles listened carefully, jotting down notes. He realized he wasn't just dealing with a single instance of overreach. This was part of a larger pattern of abuse. The homeowner association was using its authority to micromanage the neighborhood while ignoring its own rules and procedures. It wasn't just unfair, it was likely illegal. Determined to gather more evidence, Charles decided to visit the clubhouse again, this time to request copies of all recent meeting minutes and any correspondence related to the rule change. When he arrived, the receptionist looked visibly uncomfortable, but complied with his request after he insisted. As he reviewed the documents in the clubhouse lobby, Charles discovered something shocking. The amendment banning driveway gates had been passed in a meeting with fewer than 10 attendees, most of whom were homeowner association board members. There was no record of a community-wide vote or any effort to notify residents. It was a blatant violation of the homeowner association's bylaws, which required significant changes to be approved by a majority of homeowners. Charles's hands trembled as he took photos of the documents with his phone. This was the smoking gun he needed. Not only had the homeowner association failed to notify residents, but they had also bypassed their own rules to push through an amendment that allowed them to target specific homeowners. It was a clear abuse of power. Feeling a surge of determination, Charles began drafting a formal complaint to the homeowner association. He detailed the removal of his gate, the lack of proper notice about the rule change, and the violation of the homeowner association's own bylaws. He also requested an immediate reinstatement of his gate and an apology for the unauthorized removal. But he didn't stop there. Charles reached out to a property attorney, explaining the situation and providing copies of the documents he had collected. The attorney confirmed what Charles suspected. The homeowner association's actions were not only unethical but also potentially unlawful. They agreed to help him draft a demand letter and, if necessary, file for an injunction to prevent the homeowner association from enforcing the rule. By the end of the day, Charles felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was standing up for his neighbors and the principle that no one, not even the homeowner association, was above the rules. As he prepared to send out his complaint and demand letter, he couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Charles spent the next few days meticulously preparing for what he knew would be a long battle with the homeowner association. His dining table, once a space for family meals and quiet evenings, had transformed into a war room. Stacks of documents, printouts of emails, annotated homeowner association bylaws, and a growing list of neighbors' grievances covered every inch of the surface. This wasn't just about his gate anymore. It was about holding the homeowner association accountable for its unchecked power and restoring fairness to the community. After consulting with his attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Claire Phillips, Charles had a clear plan of action. The first step was to send a demand letter to the homeowner association, outlining their violations and requesting immediate remedies. Claire helped draft the letter, which cited specific sections of the homeowner association bylaws and legal precedents that supported Charles's case. The letter demanded the reinstatement of Charles's gate, reimbursement for the unauthorized removal, and a full explanation of the rule change process. It also threatened legal action if the homeowner association failed to respond within 10 business days. With the letter sent, Charles turned his attention to rallying community support. He knew that his case would be stronger if he could show that other homeowners were similarly affected by the homeowner association's overreach. He began by visiting his neighbors one by one, sharing his story, and asking for theirs in return. At first, some residents were hesitant to speak out, fearing retaliation from the homeowner association. Over the years, the association had developed a reputation for pettiness and vindictiveness, often targeting vocal critics with fines and enforcement actions. But Charles's passion and determination were contagious, and slowly but surely, more people began to open up. Stacy and Mark were among the first to lend their support, sharing their experiences with the homeowner association and helping Charles connect with other frustrated homeowners. Together, they organized a neighborhood meeting at Mark's house, inviting anyone who had concerns about the homeowner association's behavior. Word spread quickly, and on the evening of the meeting, over 30 residents packed into Mark's living room and kitchen, eager to share their stories. The meeting was both cathartic and eye-opening. One resident, Miss Bailey, recounted how the homeowner association had fined her $500 for installing a bird feeder in her backyard, claiming it attracted undesirable wildlife. Another man, Tom, described how he'd been forced to remove a flagpole he'd installed to honor his late father, a veteran, after the homeowner association deemed it a visual distraction. Others shared tales of arbitrary fines, unannounced rule changes, and a general lack of transparency in the homeowner association's decision-making process. As the stories poured in, Charles took careful notes, compiling a growing dossier of grievances. He also encouraged residents to sign a petition demanding greater transparency and accountability from the homeowner association. By the end of the night, nearly everyone in attendance had signed the petition, and several volunteered to help gather additional signatures from neighbors who couldn't make it to the meeting. Buoyed by the success of the meeting, Charles and his newfound allies began to strategize their next steps. They decided to create a formal homeowners coalition to represent the interests of the community and serve as a counterbalance to the homeowner association's power. Stacy volunteered to act as the coalition's spokesperson, while Mark offered to handle logistics and communications. Charles, naturally, took on the role of lead organizer, using his case as a rallying point for the group's efforts. As the coalition gained momentum, the homeowner association began to take notice. A week after sending the demand letter, Charles received a terse email from the homeowner association president, a man named Richard Coleman. The email dismissed Charles's claims as unsubstantiated and accused him of fomenting unrest in the community. It also warned that any further disruption would be met with disciplinary action. Undeterred, Charles forwarded the email to Claire, who responded with a single sentence: "They've just handed us more ammunition." Claire filed a formal complaint against the homeowner association on Charles's behalf, citing multiple violations of their bylaws and state property laws. She also requested an injunction to prevent the homeowner association from enforcing the new gate rule until the matter could be resolved in court. The filing sent shockwaves through the neighborhood, emboldening more residents to come forward with their own stories of mistreatment. In the meantime, the homeowners coalition continued to grow. They launched a website to share updates on Charles's case and provide resources for residents dealing with homeowner association issues. They also began holding regular meetings, which quickly became a forum for discussing not just the gate rule, but broader concerns about the homeowner association's governance. As the coalition gained traction, it became clear that the tide was turning. Charles's case reached a turning point when a local news outlet picked up the story. A reporter, intrigued by the growing controversy, interviewed Charles and several of his neighbors for an article about homeowner association overreach. The piece, titled "Homeowners Fight Back Against Homeowner Association Power Grab," painted a damning picture of the association's behavior and highlighted the community's efforts to demand change. Within days of the article's publication, the story went viral, attracting attention from other media outlets and even local politicians. Faced with mounting pressure, the homeowner association finally agreed to meet with Charles and his attorney to discuss a potential resolution. The meeting, held in a cramped conference room at the homeowner association office, was tense from the start. Richard Coleman, flanked by 2 board members and a lawyer, opened the meeting with a condescending remark about certain individuals causing unnecessary drama. Claire didn't flinch. "Let's focus on the facts," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "Your association has violated its own bylaws, failed to notify residents of major rule changes, and unlawfully removed my client's property. We're here to discuss how you're going to make this right." The homeowner association's lawyer tried to argue that the gate rule was necessary to maintain the neighborhood's aesthetic standards, but Claire countered with evidence showing that the rule change process had been improperly handled. She also pointed out that the homeowner association's actions had already sparked a community backlash, making it in their best interest to resolve the matter amicably. After several hours of heated discussion, the homeowner association reluctantly agreed to reinstate Charles's gate and reimburse him for the removal costs. They also committed to reviewing their rule change procedures and holding a community-wide vote on any future amendments. It was a hard-fought victory, but Charles knew the battle wasn't over. As he left the meeting, Charles couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. His fight had exposed the homeowner association's abuses and sparked a movement for change. And while there was still work to be done, he was more determined than ever to see it through. The day after the tense meeting with the homeowner association, Charles woke up to a strange feeling of relief and determination. The reinstatement of his driveway gate and the reimbursement for its removal were victories, but they were just the beginning. The promise of procedural reviews and community-wide votes on future amendments was a step in the right direction. But the homeowner association's history of overreach and disregard for its own rules made one thing clear: lasting change would require vigilance and accountability. Charles's first task was to follow up with the Homeowners Coalition. The group's enthusiasm had grown significantly since the local news coverage, and more residents were attending the meetings. At the next gathering, held at the community park to accommodate the increasing turnout, over 50 homeowners showed up. Charles stood at the front, a mix of gratitude and resolve in his voice. "Thanks to all of you, we've already made progress," he began, recounting the agreement with the homeowner association. "But let's not forget why we're here. This isn't just about my gate or the fines many of you have faced. This is about taking back our community, making sure the homeowner association works for us, not against us." The crowd erupted into applause. Many of the attendees shared Charles's frustration, and the coalition had given them a platform to voice their concerns. Over the next hour, residents shared updates on their individual cases, from fines for minor landscaping decisions to disputes over parking regulations. Each story underscored the need for a united front against the homeowner association's arbitrary enforcement of rules. After the meeting, Charles and a few key members of the coalition stayed behind to discuss next steps. Stacy, the coalition spokesperson, proposed drafting a formal charter for the group to outline its goals and establish a framework for its operations. Mark, who had a background in project management, suggested organizing committees to tackle specific issues such as legal research, communication, and outreach. "We need to show the homeowner association that we're serious," Mark said. "This isn't just a group of angry neighbors. This is a movement." Charles agreed. They decided to name the coalition the Fair Community Alliance and set a goal of becoming a recognized homeowners association alternative. The plan was ambitious, but with the momentum they'd built, it felt achievable. The alliance quickly got to work. The legal committee, led by Charles with guidance from his attorney Claire, began reviewing the homeowner association's bylaws and identifying areas where they had violated their own rules or overstepped their authority. They compiled a detailed report highlighting the homeowner association's failures, from the improperly enacted rule changes to the lack of transparency in financial reporting. The report would become a cornerstone of their campaign for reform. Meanwhile, the Communication Committee launched a neighborhood-wide survey to gather feedback from residents about their experiences with the homeowner association. The results were damning. Over 70% of respondents reported feeling that the homeowner association did not represent their interests, and nearly 60% had experienced fines or enforcement actions they believed were unfair. The survey also revealed a widespread desire for more homeowner involvement in decision-making. Armed with this data, the Outreach Committee began a door-to-door campaign to share the findings and encourage more residents to join the alliance. Volunteers distributed flyers and spoke with neighbors about the importance of standing together. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many residents expressing relief that someone was finally standing up to the homeowner association. As the alliance grew, so did the pressure on the homeowner association. Richard Coleman, the homeowner association president, responded by attempting to discredit the group. He sent out a letter to all homeowners, accusing the alliance of spreading misinformation and undermining the community's standards. The letter backfired spectacularly. Many residents saw it as further evidence of the homeowner association's unwillingness to listen to legitimate concerns, and membership in the alliance surged. Charles knew it was time to take their campaign to the next level. The alliance drafted a formal petition calling for a special election to replace the homeowner association board. According to the bylaws, if 25% of homeowners signed the petition, the homeowner association would be required to hold the election. Within 2 weeks, the alliance had collected signatures from over 40% of residents. The petition's success forced the homeowner association to schedule a special election, but it also intensified the conflict. The homeowner association began ramping up enforcement actions, issuing fines and violation notices at an unprecedented rate. Many alliance members found themselves targeted, but instead of backing down, they used the harassment as further motivation to fight back. The weeks leading up to the election were marked by a flurry of activity. The alliance worked tirelessly to prepare its slate of candidates, which included Charles, Stacy, and 3 other well-respected community members. Each candidate brought a unique perspective and set of skills to the table, from legal expertise to financial management. To counter the homeowner association's smear campaign, the alliance organized town hall meetings where the candidates could speak directly to residents. These events were well attended, with standing room crowds eager to hear the alliance's vision for the community. The candidates emphasized transparency, fairness, and homeowner empowerment, contrasting sharply with the homeowner association's reputation for secrecy and authoritarianism. The homeowner association, meanwhile, doubled down on its efforts to retain control. They sent out glossy mailers touting their achievements and warning that the alliance's reforms would lead to chaos and declining property values. But the community had grown weary of the homeowner association's fear tactics, and the mailers only served to deepen the divide. On the day of the election, the neighborhood was buzzing with anticipation. Residents lined up at the clubhouse to cast their votes, many expressing hope that change was finally within reach. The alliance had organized volunteers to monitor the process and ensure a fair count, knowing that the stakes were too high to risk any irregularities. When the results were announced that evening, the alliance's candidates won by a landslide. Charles, Stacy, and the others celebrated with their supporters, but they knew the real work was just beginning. The victory marked the end of one battle and the beginning of another. A battle to rebuild trust, reform the homeowner association, and create a community that truly served its residents. As Charles stood before the cheering crowd that night, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The fight had been long and difficult, but it had been worth it. Together, they had proven that even the most entrenched systems of power could be challenged and changed when people came together with a common purpose. The atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted dramatically after the election results were announced. For the first time in years, residents felt hopeful about the future of their community. The alliance's victory wasn't just a win for Charles and his neighbors. It was a decisive rejection of the homeowner association's old regime and its unchecked power. But as Charles celebrated with his fellow homeowners, he knew the real work was only beginning. Winning the election was one thing. Delivering on their promises of transparency, fairness, and reform was another challenge entirely. The new board, with Charles as its president, wasted no time getting to work. Within a week, they held their first public meeting, inviting all homeowners to attend and share their concerns. The turnout was overwhelming, with residents packing the community clubhouse and spilling out onto the lawn. Charles stood at the podium, a mix of nervousness and determination in his voice. "Thank you for putting your trust in us," he began. "We know there's a lot to fix and we can't do it overnight, but I promise you this. We will listen to you, we will be transparent, and we will work tirelessly to make this neighborhood a place we can all be proud of." The crowd erupted in applause. For the first time, many residents felt like their voices mattered. Over the next 2 hours, Charles and the board listened as homeowners shared their frustrations and ideas for improvement. Common themes emerged: a lack of clear communication, arbitrary fines, and a general sense that the homeowner association had been more focused on control than communication. One of the board's first actions was to overhaul the homeowner association's communication practices. They established a comprehensive email system to notify residents of meetings, rule changes, and other important updates. Meeting minutes were published online within 24 hours, and every decision was accompanied by a clear explanation of the reasoning behind it. The board also introduced a monthly newsletter featuring updates on ongoing projects, financial reports, and spotlights on community members. This small gesture went a long way in rebuilding trust. Homeowners appreciated being kept in the loop and knowing exactly how their dues were being used. To ensure future transparency, the board voted to install a new system for community input. Residents could now submit proposals for rule changes, which would be reviewed and voted on by the entire community. This move shifted the power dynamic, ensuring that major decisions were made democratically rather than unilaterally. One of the most contentious issues under the previous homeowner association leadership had been the excessive use of fines as a means of enforcement. Charles and the board conducted a thorough review of all outstanding fines and identified numerous cases where penalties had been issued unfairly or without proper notice. They decided to waive or reduce fines in cases where the homeowner had been unfairly targeted or where the infraction was minor. The board also revised the community's enforcement policies to focus on collaboration rather than punishment. For minor violations, homeowners would now receive a friendly reminder and a reasonable time frame to address the issue before any penalties were imposed. This approach not only reduced tension, but also encouraged homeowners to take pride in maintaining their properties. One of the most significant challenges facing the new board was revising the homeowner association's rulebook. Under the previous regime, the rules had become bloated and overly restrictive, with little consideration for practicality or homeowner input. Charles and his team decided to start from scratch, consulting legal experts, urban planners, and, most importantly, the residents themselves. Over the course of several months, the board held workshops and town hall meetings to gather feedback on the new rules. They encouraged open discussions and made sure every voice was heard, from longtime residents to newcomers. The result was a streamlined, homeowner-friendly rulebook that focused on essential standards while allowing for individual expression and creativity. One of the most controversial changes was the reinstatement of driveway gates. After much debate, the community voted overwhelmingly to allow gates as long as they met basic aesthetic guidelines. For Charles, this was a deeply personal victory, a symbol of how far the neighborhood had come. As the new rules took effect, the neighborhood began to transform in ways that went beyond governance. Residents, inspired by the board's collaborative approach, started to take more initiative in building a sense of community. The board organized events like neighborhood cleanups, block parties, and charity drives, which brought people together and strengthened their connection. One particularly memorable event was a community vision day, where residents gathered to discuss their hopes and dreams for the neighborhood. Ideas ranged from creating a community garden to installing a playground for children. These projects, funded by a combination of homeowner association dues and volunteer efforts, became symbols of the neighborhood's newfound unity. For Charles, the most rewarding part of this transformation was seeing his neighbors take ownership of their community. Homeowners who had once felt powerless and disconnected were now active participants in shaping the future of their neighborhood. The shift was tangible, not just in the physical appearance of the community, but in the way people interacted with each other. A year after the election, Charles stood in his driveway, admiring the gate that had started it all. It wasn't just a gate anymore, it was a reminder of everything the neighborhood had overcome. As he looked around, he saw children playing in yards, neighbors chatting over fences, and a sense of pride that hadn't been there before. Charles's journey from frustrated homeowner to community leader had been anything but easy. There had been moments of doubt, setbacks, and sleepless nights, but through it all, he had never lost sight of what he was fighting for: a community where everyone felt heard, valued, and respected. Looking back, Charles realized that the Homeowner Association's overreach had been a blessing in disguise. It had awakened the neighborhood to the importance of standing together and holding those in power accountable. And while there would always be challenges, Charles knew they could face them as a united community. As the sun set over the neighborhood, Charles felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The fight for his gate had turned into something much bigger: a movement for fairness, transparency, and community, and for the first time in years, he felt truly at home.